She didn't ruin your life. She revealed the lie you've been living. You think you're choosing love, but what you're really doing is reenacting your own disappearance. One woman after another, same emptiness, different perfume. You weren't unlucky. You were obedient to a fantasy passed down by stories, by weakness, by silence. Machiavelli didn't write about women to judge them. He wrote about power and the men who lose it in the name of what they think is love. This isn't a video about hate. It's about your mirror, the one you've been too afraid to look into because it shows the face of the man you became just to keep her around. But there's a darker truth beneath it all. What if she wasn't the problem? What if she was the pattern? And what if the real danger isn't her, but the version of you that keeps calling this love? He thought she saw him, but what she really saw was a man too hungry to hide it. Every compliment felt like redemption, every silence like rejection. It wasn't love, it was a transaction, presence traded for pain relief. Recognition isn't when someone looks at you, it's when they see what you've buried. He mistook the spotlight for warmth. Attention isn't affection, proximity isn't presence. She gave him breadcrumbs and he called it dinner. Because when your soul has starved long enough, even scraps feel sacred. But there's no nourishment in being tolerated. Machiavelli warned, if a man loses both love and fear, he becomes easy to rule. This is what most men don't understand. He wasn't being loved. He was being managed. She never had to conquer him. He walked into the cage and locked it from the inside. It always starts the same. The right words, the smile that makes your defenses sleepwalk. But over time, your name feels absent in her mouth. She wants your attention, not your truth. And you, desperate to matter, gave her both. Most men don't fall in love. They fall into relief, the kind that tastes like possibility, not peace. She didn't overlook him. He made himself disappear. Because when you've built your identity on being useful, vanishing feels like loyalty. You keep asking why she didn't choose you, but the better question is, why do you keep choosing to not exist? She wasn't rejecting your essence. She was responding to your silence. And silence, over time, becomes self-erasure. The fantasy of being seen is powerful. But attention isn't proof of love, it's a mirror of your hunger. You weren't in love, you were in survival. You weren't being adored, you were being consumed. Not by her, but by your own emotional quicksand. There's a difference between being seen and being stared at. She looked at the version of you that begged for approval, not the one you hide when you're alone. And maybe that's why it never felt enough. Because no woman can fill a void you defend like a shrine. He didn't want her love. He wanted her approval, dressed as intimacy. Every glance became an exam, every silence a failing grade. Not because she tested him, but because he'd made her gaze the only mirror that mattered. She was never just a woman to him. She was a verdict. If she adored him, he mattered. If she withdrew, he shattered. He wasn't building connection. He was chasing permission to exist. And every time she blinked, his value trembled. It wasn't chemistry, it was confession, the kind that says, if she sees me as enough, maybe I can believe it too. But she was never meant to be the judge of his manhood. He made her the gatekeeper of a kingdom he hadn't even claimed. And when she slammed the door, he thought it was her fault. Machiavelli once said, never rely on the gratitude of the weak. They will turn on you. She didn't owe him recognition for bending. She didn't betray him. She responded to a man who traded himself for validation. Even dogs know when love comes with a leash. He thought devotion would earn him glory. But loyalty without identity isn't respected. It's devoured. You cannot earn from a woman what you won't first grant yourself. She wasn't the obstacle. He was the exile, begging to be crowned by someone else's eyes. Why do you keep chasing women who reflect your wound? Because you're not seeking connection, you're seeking confirmation. That you're worthy, that you're enough, that you're not invisible. But when your identity is outsourced, every woman becomes a battlefield, and no war fought for approval ever ends in peace. She didn't fail him. She was just the next version of a test he keeps writing for himself. The subject is always the same. Can I be seen and stay intact? But the answer keeps coming back in scars. Here's the bitter medicine. She wasn't the test. He was the one failing his own reflection. He handed her the rubric, then cried when she graded him exactly how he feared. He knew the moment it happened, not when she smiled, not when she stayed, but when he heard his own voice go quiet. The man he once was, sharp, grounded, unyielding, started dimming, and she called it love. She said, "You've changed," and he smiled, thinking it was growth. But it wasn't evolution, it was erasure. Piece by piece, he trimmed his truth to fit her comfort, and for a while it worked. Until silence became the cost of staying wanted. He stopped saying no. He stopped dreaming out loud. He dressed his fire in politeness, mistaking obedience for intimacy, not because she asked him to, but because he believed that to be loved, he had to vanish. There's a subtle death that happens in men, not in war, but in relationships built on performance. They trade authenticity for affection. They become what she wants, and forget what they were. And when it ends, they don't just lose her, they lose the last thread of themselves. Machiavelli said, "He who builds his strength on the desires of others is already conquered." She didn't betray him. He betrayed the man who once refused to kneel. Because if the only way to stay loved is to amputate your soul, you were never loved, just tolerated in disguise. Real love doesn't demand your disappearance. It confronts your essence and invites it forward. But most men were never taught to hold that line, so they confuse acceptance with surrender and wear the relationship like a leash. Ask yourself, if you stop performing, does she still stay? If your mask falls, does she reach for your face or recoil? Because fake love depends on costume changes, and real love is only possible when there's nothing left to hide. Here's the haunting truth. He wasn't unloved. He was adored, but only by the version of himself that had no voice. And now that he's speaking again, she's looking at him like a stranger. He thought her dependence meant devotion. She needed him, his time, his advice, his presence. But under the surface, he wasn't her partner. He was her emotional crutch, dressed in masculinity. And he mistook being used for being seen. She didn't say, "I love you." She said, "I need you." And to a man starving for purpose, those words felt holy. So he gave everything: time, money, silence, until there was nothing left but a scar where his self-respect once lived. It felt like love because it felt urgent. But being someone's solution doesn't mean being someone's equal. He became her therapist, her provider, her fixer. And slowly, she stopped seeing him at all. Not because she changed, but because he stopped showing up as himself. Machiavelli said, "It is not necessity that binds people. It is leverage." She didn't stay because of love. She stayed because of access. And he thought, if I make myself indispensable, she won't leave. But that's not love, that's a transaction. He wasn't helping. He was hiding from his own void by trying to fill hers. The more she demanded, the more he gave. But underneath it all, he wasn't generous. He was terrified. Terrified that without her need, he had no worth. This is the lie men swallow whole, that being essential is the same as being cherished. But love doesn't ask you to bleed on command. It doesn't say prove it every time you breathe. It holds you even when you bring nothing. He thought sacrifice made him noble, but if your soul is the payment, it's not virtue, it's desperation. Being needed isn't intimacy, it's performance with a noose around your neck. And the tighter she pulled, the quieter he became. She didn't betray him. She used the role he handed her, the keeper of his relevance. But love, real love, doesn't measure your value by your usefulness. He wasn't her partner. He was her resource, not her revelation. He saw the pain in her eyes and mistook it for depth. He thought, if I heal her, she'll never leave. But wounds don't bind people, illusions do. And he wasn't in love with her. He was in love with the project, the potential, the hope. She didn't ask to be saved, but he needed to save her. Not for her sake, but for his. If she transformed, maybe he could finally feel chosen. Maybe her healing would be his validation. But the more he gave, the less she respected him. Trauma bonding is a silent addiction. It whispers, if I fix her, I matter. But the truth, she wasn't healing beside him. She was hiding behind him. And when he collapsed, she moved on like it meant nothing. Machiavelli's silence says everything. The prince who invests in chaos loses his crown. He poured stability into her dysfunction, called it love, called it loyalty. But she wasn't his partner. She was his mirror of avoidance. He didn't want to face his own fracture, so he chose a woman who screamed louder than his inner voice. If he was busy fixing her, he never had to look inward. And if she stayed broken, he could keep playing savior, because saviors don't have time to confront their own emptiness. But here's the dark truth. You don't fix people into loyalty. You just teach them to lean on your exhaustion. She didn't owe him anything, not her healing, not her gratitude. He was the one who handed her the blueprint for his own demise. He called her fragile, but she was functional, just not for love. She didn't need a partner. She needed a place to unload. And he, pretending to be her anchor, was just another port for her storms. He thought he was her protector, but he was her escape plan. And when she found a softer shoulder or a louder stage, she walked, leaving him with nothing but the weight of the fantasy. Saving her wasn't love. It was self-abandonment in a noble disguise. He thought loyalty was strength, but in her hands it became a leash. Every act of devotion made him smaller, not because she wanted to break him, but because he kept offering himself as a cage she never asked for. He stayed when she tested him. He forgave when she pushed, and every time she crossed a line, he redrew it further back, until there were no lines, only the echo of a man who mistook endurance for connection. Machiavelli whispered a truth few men dare hear. The man who is loyal before tested is a fool in a silk robe. He didn't earn her respect, he earned her control. Because when loyalty is unconditional, it becomes a weapon in the wrong hands. She didn't betray him. She followed the script his silence handed her. He thought, if I keep proving I'll stay, she'll finally feel safe. But safety without consequence breeds contempt, and she began to pull. Not to feel close, but to feel power. There's a difference between commitment and captivity, but a man afraid of abandonment doesn't see it. He sees her threats as wounds he needs to heal. He calls her coldness a phase. And with every compromise, he sharpens the knife she'll one day use. He confused consistency with value. But presence without power is just performance. You don't win love by refusing to leave. You win pity. You win predictability. And in her eyes, both are boring. You think your loyalty protects the bond. But if she's testing it, it means she doesn't trust it. And if she doesn't trust it, your loyalty will never be enough. Because deep down, she's waiting for you to prove you won't disappear by finally disappearing from yourself. You weren't betrayed. You were revealed. Not as a villain, but as a man who traded self-respect for attachment. And when she finally walked away, it wasn't a surprise. It was the conclusion to a story you kept rewriting with silence. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. It always feels new. The spark, the thrill, the magnetic pull, but it ends the same, with silence, blame, and a reflection you can't stand. She's not the curse. She's the consequence of your unspoken beliefs. You don't attract who you want. You attract who you are, beneath the mask. And if deep down you believe you're not enough, you'll find a woman who confirms it again and again, not out of malice, but out of mirror. Machiavelli didn't need romance to make his point. The prince learns by loss, not by theory. Every woman who hurt you carried a lesson, not about her, but about you. And the hardest part, You knew it before she even spoke your name. You call it bad luck. But it's loyalty, not to her, but to your wound. You don't chase women, you chase repetition. The same chaos, the same games, the same inner voice that says, "See, still not enough." She isn't random. She's the pattern your psyche refuses to break. The moment she withholds, you regress. Not because she's cruel, but because her coldness rhymes with your history. You loved her because she fit your script, and she left when the story turned unfamiliar. But ask yourself, who wrote the script? What belief are you still defending like it's sacred? And who benefits from you staying broken? She wasn't your test, she was your feedback. And until you examine the lie, the one that says you must earn love through sacrifice, you will keep collecting new faces with the same ending. Same silence, different perfume. The wrong woman isn't your punishment, she's your prophecy. And until you rewrite what you believe about yourself, you'll keep dating your own wound in different heels. Healing begins not with her apology, but with your confrontation. It felt real because it hurt. She made you feel alive, not with tenderness, but with turmoil. Every fight felt like proof that you cared. Proof that something sacred was happening. But chaos isn't depth. It's just noise that drowns the silence inside you. You told yourself, this is passion, but it wasn't. It was withdrawal, from calm, from clarity, from yourself. She wasn't your muse, she was your addiction wearing lipstick. Machiavelli understood this madness. He wrote, "A ruler must learn not to be good, because being good to the wrong woman makes you a servant to her storms, and no kingdom survives a queen who burns down her own throne." You called it connection because it made you ache, but love isn't supposed to leave you guessing every night. It isn't supposed to demand your pride as payment. You thought the intensity meant something deep, but it was just trauma speaking your name again. She didn't teach you love, she taught you obsession, and because your nervous system never knew peace, you mistook adrenaline for intimacy. And silence, the real kind, scared you more than her rage. You weren't in love, you were in withdrawal, from yourself, from stillness, from self-respect. She wasn't your soulmate, she was your relapse, and every time you called it love, your shadow smiled. Intensity is not intimacy, and pain, repeated long enough, becomes familiar. But familiarity isn't truth, it's just memory recycled into a loop. And you've mistaken the loop for fate. Here's the cold truth. You didn't fall in love. You fell into your own unsolved pain. And she, beautifully, tragically, gave that pain a name. But naming it isn't healing, letting it go is. You thought this was about her, but it never was. It was about the parts of you that no longer fight back, when you start shrinking to fit inside someone else's affection. So here's the question. What if every woman who broke you was just echoing a belief you never dared to break? What if the pain wasn't punishment, but prophecy? Because at some point every man must choose. Keep rewriting himself to be loved by women who don't see him, or rewrite the script that keeps dragging him into ruin. She wasn't your goddess, she was your gauge. She showed you exactly how far you've drifted from your own edge. So now you ask, where does this path lead? To silence, to truth, to the kind of man no woman can manipulate, because he no longer manipulates himself. If you're ready to become that man, subscribe, turn on the notifications, and stay with us on this journey of brutal self-knowledge and emotional resurrection. And if this shook something loose in you, wait until you hear what Machiavelli really said about men who don't just choose the wrong woman, but worship her. Because the next mistake isn't falling for her, it's kneeling,